Hello there. Labour has a plan to crash the housing market. Labour is planning a property revolution, something that shows us exactly what the future has in store for us. UK population numbers are going through the roof, and housing is in ever shorter supply. So despite a cost of living crisis, market conditions keep house prices and rents at an elevated level. As a result, first-time buyers with the real wherewithal to buy are becoming scarce. Interest rates are set to rise, and mortgage rates will therefore follow. But Labour has a plan. They've identified that land ownership and planning permission is the problem. So a Labour government would empower local councils to use compulsory purchase powers to buy the land they need for house building at lower agricultural prices, instead of at potential market prices, reports the FT. And the difference between the two can be many multiples depending on the location. So landowners would be forced to sell their land for a song and make no profit from the ensuing housing development. But the money saved by the council could be used to help with infrastructure costs. Rich landowner shafted. The community gets nice cheaper houses and some infrastructure. Every communist would be pleased, especially if these were permanent council houses. So the council would control both the purchase and planning permission of land. So if a landowner wanted planning permission to build houses, the council could refuse it, then forcibly buy the land cheap and build the houses for themselves for the community. There'd have to be a lot of safeguards built into that one, especially where contracts are handed out, because the temptations for councillors and council workers to stray from the straight and narrow would be enormous. But it will allow councils to construct neighbourhoods where everything is just 15 minutes away and where houses don't need wasted spaces like garages. But the real pain here is that the aim of this scheme is to provide many more houses and drive house prices and rents down. And I say pain because if house prices start falling, the banks will find themselves potentially holding a stack of older mortgages where the property is worth less than the mortgage amount owed. Underwater, in negative equity. And that would include a lot of landlords who leverage their rental properties. On top of that, falling house prices is not a good look for governments in the long term. Remember, house prices are the only price rises that ordinary UK consumers are okay with. In fact, they like it. Everything else they see as a rip-off. It is also not exactly a good investment for investors like banks. Who would lend into a falling market? And how many people would buy a house in a falling market? In finance jargon, why catch a falling knife? In fact, who would build houses in such a market environment? Well, government employees or contractors would. Maybe that's where we'd end up, councils controlling the whole process, the purchase of land, the planning permission, the construction phase, and the eventual sale and renting of the properties. You might even need a publicly owned lender to bypass those greedy market-driven bankers. Maybe this is where those Labour-reformed pension schemes would be encouraged to invest their savers' money. But that doesn't help those earlier buyers who would find themselves trapped in negative equity. Then there's the ethical dimension. Can it be right for someone in authority on a council to have the power to expropriate your property for a low price, in the knowledge that it is worth far more once the council has rubber-stamped the planning proposals that they control. And although there are currently stringent rules covering the grantings of such planning permission, I would reckon that a Labour central government would ease those rules to allow the councils to build wherever and whenever to provide the housing needed for the millions they intend to let into the country. But this concept can also be widened out to include purchase of land for wind turbines and solar farms, for example. How about community agriculture? Why let a landowner benefit when the council can snatch the land for the community? You could also include an expansion of allotments. Although giving people the power to grow their own food doesn't seem to be on the WEF agenda, so I'm not sure that would happen. And on the other side of the ethical question, is it right that a handful of people up and down the country own most of the land and can therefore basically control what goes on in their communities? Anyway, don't let ethics get in the way of politics. All Labour has to do is work out which has the largest vote share and, just as importantly, the largest party donor share. The wealthy landowners, the generally wealthy and the bankers on one side, or the recently downtrodden masses who can't get a nice cheap place to live in, and the unions. Right now, if Labour said they will fleece the greedy landowners and batter the bankers, but give the proles a slice of the pie, it'd be a big vote winner in a lot of communities. While the continued fast population growth, coupled with all that construction work, would boost the country's GDP and potentially the tax revenue too. But I'm not sure the delivery would ever meet the expectations, mainly because whatever Labour thinks about rich bankers, they do need the banks to stay solvent. So falling house prices won't be a good option. But allowing inflation and wage inflation to stay ahead of house price growth might help. But look at the last year or so. House prices generally stagnant, but lagging inflation. Therefore, house prices look steady on paper, but are already falling in real terms. And that's with a low level of house building going on. So trying to keep house prices stable would be a very tricky call. Just imagine if hundreds of thousands of more new units were being built right now. House prices would probably plunge, taking the lenders with them. But we're now continually told that we must build houses at scale. And there's only one underlying reason for that: net inward migration. But at the same time we're told we must be green and go for net zero, the 2030 plan and all that. And given that, then surely building houses is bad for the environment and increases our carbon footprint, as does allowing net immigration to rocket. Surely to save our environment, we should be limiting net inward migration. And it's when you consider that crucial point that you realise that net zero is not the top priority for our WEF and UN-led Westminster blob. No, their real priority is to increase net inward migration to the highest level achievable, while creating a society newly built on restrictive communism.